thank everybody for being here tonight. Really, really wonderful evening. And I join with Mike in thanking Zorbas for hosting that, and join with him in thanking Mr. Duncan, Duncan Family Foundation, the Greater Lowell Community Foundation, for helping to support this evening and bring Kevin here and just get us all together. It's a really, really wonderful, wonderful time. And we're honored to celebrate the life and the legacy of Jack Kerouac, especially here on the 60th anniversary this year of the publication of On the Road, published in September of 1957. So it is just a great evening. What we're going to do, in order to bring up our special guest tonight, I'm going to read just a short passage from On the Road. This towards the end, as you can see, it's kind of towards the end of the book. Jack and Neal have come to New York. Jack is getting ready to set out again. Neal's going to be staying in New York for a time. And Camille is Carolyn Cassady, and Ed Dunkel is Al Hinkle in this passage. He, that is to say Neal, Dean in this case, Dean took out a snapshot of Camille in Frisco with the new baby girl. The shadow of a man crossed the child on the sunny pavement, 2 long trouser legs in the sadness. Who's that? That's Ed Dunkel. He got back to Galatea. They're in Denver now. Ed Dunkel, his compassion unnoticed like the compassion of saints. Let's go back to that line. Dean took out a snapshot of Camille in Frisco with the new baby girl. Well, we're very honored and delighted to have that new baby girl with us tonight, some 60 years later. I shouldn't really say how many. I want you to give a great big Lowell Celebrates Kerouac and Lowell welcome to Jami Cassady. Come on up, Jami. Jami, it's so great to have you here this evening. Welcome to Lowell. I knew you and your husband Randy over here. You've been on the road yourselves, right? Doing your little cross-country run from Capitola, California, which is where you live.
Yeah, we've been on the road since 9/11, and excellent on the road trip, just unbelievable. So, thank you.
Okay.
But this was our goal. To get
here. Lowell was the destination.
Right.
Well, you've got here, and we're really, really delighted about that.
Thank you.
We're going to do a little conversation up here for a time, and hopefully let you see a little some of her father Neal's life. Neal, as I'm sure any of you who've read On the Road know, was the basis for the character of Dean Moriarty. So let's start here, Jami.
Yeah.
You were about 7 or 8 years old, I think, when On the Road was published, and
Yes.
your father, Neal, was introduced to the world by the way of Jack Kerouac as Dean Moriarty.
Yes.
I have mostly kind of just bits. When I try to remember what I was like when I was 7 or 8 years old, I kind of got bits and pieces of my life, not a whole big narrative. So let me start off by asking you, what do you recall of your family life at that time? Your mother, Carolyn, your father, Neal, and did the publication of On the Road have any kind of effect on your family? Just say a little bit about what it was like. 7, 8 years old, On the Road comes out, your father becomes known to the world as Dean Moriarty.
No idea. Absolutely had no idea about any of them. Mom kept everything very controlled. She didn't want her kids to end up like Neal. So this book came out. I didn't know anything about it until when I was 14, maybe in 1964. So in my childhood at home, nothing. There was no, nobody came over and went, "Ooh, hi," or nothing. No, there was nothing. I mean, I still went to ballet classes. Mom did all of her artwork. We were in school. No clue. No.
Okay. Well, that gets me to what I want to ask you about, and see what you can tell me whether you agree with on this. I'd like your take on it, because from what I've come to learn of your father's life, it seems like he had, as you moved into your adolescence, and you already mentioned that, it seemed like he had a couple of lives going in a way. You had, as you've already indicated, Neal Cassady, family man, wife, 3 kids, living kind of an average-looking house in Los Gatos, getting up and going to work every morning on the Southern Pacific Railroad. Yeah. In other words, there was a part of Neal that was living your basic 1950s middle-class life like millions of other people were doing. Yep. And then here comes this book, and you get Neal Cassady, Dean Moriarty. which is kind of comes off in the book as almost the antithesis of the 1950s life.
Yep.
Footloose vagabond making these madcap, wild-ass trips around the country, woman in every port, so to speak.
Yep.
Probably played into every kind of male fantasy that was out there, the people who were reading this. I guess what I'm asking is, did you experience these two aspects of your dad?
No, he was Dad. He worked on the Southern Pacific Railroad for 10 years. He never missed a day. And the only time he had to quit that job was when he was arrested in '58 for drug dealing. But, you know, he had a Southern Pacific Railroad route, and I think he had a girl in every port. And I think my mom knew that. She was amazing to try to give him the life that she thought he wanted. He never had a happy home life. His mom died, and Dad really wanted to be a suburban husband. And that's the dad I know. That was my father. He was home when he was back from his trips, and, you know, we didn't know any different. We had no clue, none.
Yeah, your mother's a bit of I met your mother a few times, very, very honored and pleased to do so, and she's always struck me as a very, almost as kind of enigmatic character as Neal in a way. She came from this very well-bred Southern family. What her father was a professor at Vanderbilt University, all this, and then she goes to Denver to get a master's in fine arts, and happens upon Neal.
Yeah. I know. My mother is a great. I'm just learning about her because she passed. She passed in 2013, and my husband and I went to England to her house, and we took everything she had and shipped it home to Santa Cruz, California, and we're just starting to learn about her. It's amazing. Yeah, she was interesting.
As I say, I had the honor of getting to know your mom a couple of times on some of my trips out to California, and I said she's always struck me as a very fascinating person. She, as I said, very well-bred Southern lady, and I don't know. Tell me if you agree with me on this or not. I think in some ways she was kind of attracted to the bad boy side of Neal. Was that part of that going on?
You got it. Oh yeah, my mom was white, glove finger Tea Party debutante in Tennessee, Nashville in the 40s. And that's how she was brought up. And then, all of a sudden, she goes to Denver and she meets this man. And that was it. I don't know. She just fell in love. She loved him so much that she forgave him. But the big thing about her forgiving him was that Dad was the conductor on the Southern Pacific, and he was looking down the seats, and there was a book that was sitting there. It was called Many Mansions. He picked it up, he brought it home, and that's when Mom and Dad went on their reincarnation, Edgar Cayce, spiritual quest. And they realized that their life was meant to be, and they had to work it out, so maybe next life they wouldn't have to do it again, So from then on, that's all.
Yeah, there's a very spiritual component. There was a very spiritual component to their relationship. It doesn't always get a whole lot of play, but it was certainly there, and I think we need to. We should acknowledge that.
I would like to, keep that up because it changed my life. I mean, we went to Christian Science Sunday School in Los Gatos, and the reason the kids liked it was because Dad would take us for ice cream next door after Bible study. But then after a while, once we learned our Bible stories, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Mom and Dad did Sunday school at our house in Bancroft. And they would sit on the couch, and us kids could be on the floor coloring or whatever. But the whole time the Sunday school thing went on, they're reading Casey. I mean,
So Neal was your personal Sunday school teacher there for a time.
Yeah. But he was still a Catholic.
Uh-huh. Yeah, right. That was his upbringing in Denver there and all that.
He was very...
Okay. Well, you touched on this a little earlier, but let's come back to it for just a minute because we know that 2 years after the publication of On the Road, this would have been 1959, your father was arrested on what was really a trumped-up marijuana charge. 58? Okay, 58, thank you. And he was arrested on this trumped-up marijuana charge, which is now legal, I understand, in the state of California. He got a 5-year prison sentence, served 2. So I'm just wondering how that affected your family, how your mom kept things going. I know that was when Al Hinkle stepped in and was very helpful. Al Hinkle, the Ed Dunkel character we heard from earlier, I know he stepped in and was very, very helpful at that time. Just riff on that for a little bit if you'd like.
Oh, my gosh. The Hinkles, Al and Helen, saved my mother's life, really. I mean, they were there when I was born. They were there. Dad was always gone, and they basically, supported Mom.
Well, and Al Hinkle is still one of the few characters on the road who's still around, and whenever I get out to see you, we go over and visit him. Yeah.
Last man standing. He's the only one left of On the Road. I mean, he and Luann and Dad did that trip, and he's still alive, and he has such great stories. He's so cool.
I mean, he gets a good portrayal in here, and he's a really wonderful man. And I just consider it an honor to know him. And the times that you and I have gone over to his house there in San Jose have just been really wonderful times the whole time. And it's been great to be there with you and your brother John from times as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great. Well, I didn't quite answer your question because I forgot.
Oh yeah, well, how did you deal with your dad being in jail for those 2 years?
That part. Okay. Well, I knew nothing. I was 8, and when he got home, I was 10. We thought Mom told the kids that he was on a railroad trip. We had no reason to doubt her. We knew nothing about drugs. And I remember when he finally came home, I was 10 years old, and I was sitting in their master bedroom watching TV, because I think I had the mumps or the measles or something. And he walks in. I'll never forget it. Hi, hon, I'm home. Hi, Daddy. Okay. That's it.
And that was it.
Yeah. No clue.
No clue. Well, all right. All right, well, like I say, we're going to dip into the text of On the Road here for just a second.
Sure.
When we had the really wonderful presentation earlier today over at the National Park Visitor Center by John Leland, he's author of Why Kerouac Matters.
Yeah.
And in the course of his presentation, John Leland said that his favorite line in On the Road is right there in that last paragraph where it says, "Don't you know that God is Pooh Bear?" So what I found out as I did a little bit of my own research is that line does not show up in the early drafts of On the Road. Well, the reason it's not in the scroll version because Lucian Carr's dog bit off the last foot or so of the thing. But then I have seen a couple of subsequent early drafts that Jack wrote, and the line "God is Pooh Bear" is not in any of those drafts. And it's got that line. The whole line goes, as you well know, and in Iowa by now the children are crying in the land where they let the children cry, and tonight the stars will be out. And don't you know that God is Pooh Bear? Well, in the Selected Letters of Jack Kerouac, which came out in 1955, there's a letter in there he wrote to your mother, wrote to Carolyn in May of 1954, and it says, "Let me know about the little ones who know that God is Pooh Bear." Well, you and your brother and sister were the little ones that Jack is referring to here. So it looks like you got the Pooh Bear line from you and your siblings. How did that happen?
Well, the only reason I know about Pooh Bear is that my mother was, very educated, way into the English language and stuff, and she loved A. Milne. She loved him. We have first editions that she kept from her childhood. We have them now. Anyway, so every year she would make my brother, who's younger than me, a Pooh Bear. She'd sew it, she'd stuff it, she'd make him different smiles and all this. And, Jack wanted to be our father, and her husband, and that's where he got it.
You got it. So you guys you gave him the "God is Pooh Bear" line. So now we know.
Yeah.
All right, now you know that.
Because
Fantastic.
most people go, "What the heck does that mean?" Well, that's what it means.
All right.
Yeah.
Very,
Yeah.
very good. And this kind of gets into there. When Jack would make his trips out there to Los Gatos, he
Yeah.
would come and stay at your house there. I remember when your brother John was here a few years ago, he
Yeah.
liked to talk about how he would sleep out in the backyard and
Yep.
put his railroad lantern
Yep.
up on a tree limb there
Yep.
at your home in
Los
at your home there in
Gatos.
Los Gatos, and you and your John and Kathy knew him as your Uncle Jack. So, what do you remember about your Uncle Jack's visits there to Los Gatos and how all that went?
Jack would come, and I don't know why he'd rather sleep out in the back 40 under a tree in his sleeping bag, and he'd put his railroad lantern there, and he'd sleep overnight. But the next morning, us 3 kids were up, and we'd run out there and jump all over him and say, "Come on, breakfast, Uncle Jack," and he'd come in. He's very shy and quiet. And Mom, of course, would cook a big breakfast. And so we're all sitting there and climbing on his lap and, just loved him so much. He was so gentle and so loving.
Yeah, he really did. He had a really thing for the 3 of you. In some ways, I think you, Kathy, and John were his kind of surrogate daughters and son.
Yes. Well, I really believe that, of course, Jack was in love with Carolyn, and you can read that in Big Sur. And I think, I'm thinking about it now, but I think he turned into the big alcoholic after Big Sur, because Mom said, "I'm sorry, Neal got me first, but I'll see you next life."
Ooh,
and he loved us kids and all. He had Jan, of course, but that was a whole nother story. Yeah. Anyway, I really think that he became more alcoholic after Big Sur, because Mom said, "Can't do it."
Yeah.
That's my impression.
No, you probably got it there. Let's talk about Big Sur a little bit, because that was the, as you just kind of indicated there, that what happened when Jack came out to Big Sur. Most of you know that story. He was kind of overwhelmed by all the attention he was getting after the publication of On the Road, and as you indicated, that drove him even further into his drinking. I mean, he had been a pretty heavy drinker up to that time, but when he got all the accolades and both the accolades and the really severe criticism that came his way, Jack was just not prepared to be a public person. That was the thing of it. He just wanted to come and hang out with Neal and Carolyn and play with you kids, and he didn't really need all that, and so that kind of overwhelmed him to the point that he went even deeper and deeper into his drinking, and that kind of started the tailspin that very tragically eventually took his life. Yeah. But at least Lawrence Ferlinghetti tried to help him out with that in the summer of 1960. He said, "Jack, why don't you come out here and spend some time at my cabin down in Big Sur, Bixby Canyon, and just see if you can kind of get away from it all for a while and get your life together." And I think Jim Samples made a very beautiful rendition of that with "One Fast Move, I'm Gone," which you and John are both, and your mother, you're all in. You're all in that film. I just recommend it to you. It's really a wonderful job. But what I wanted to ask about was that was the last time that you and your siblings called Jack. He and Neal would see each other one more time when Ken Kesey brought the Pranksters bus to New York. We heard about that. Yeah. But any recollections of that? That's a wonderful passage in Big Sur where they write about your mom and your dad kind of sneaking up on the cabin and then bursting it open and all that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, this was, and of course it's in Big Sur. There was a little bridge to get over the creek, and then you get to Ferlinghetti's cabin, and Dad made us sneak, and then they opened the door on this cabin, and of course he was like, very hungover, very whatever drunk, and the only thing he wrote about was that my brother's hair, which was white, shone in the sun like oh my God, life might be okay now. It was a really interesting.
Yeah, I think you called it something like Golden Angels or something like that.
Golden Angel.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and yeah, that's, and we stayed there for, I don't know, a week or 2 days, I can't remember. But the big thing about Big Sur is that that's when Jack got to Mom and said, I love you. You know, I want you to be my wife. You know, I want you and the kids. And she said, sorry, can't do it. Next life.
Yeah, and that was the last time the two of them, that was the last time they saw each other, was
I
at
think
Big
so.
Sur. Well, like I said, then Jack and Neal, and we heard about this earlier from Brian and George when they did their thing over at the library earlier this afternoon. Really great job, Brian, George. I know you're out there somewhere. Yeah, good job. All right.
Yeah.
So that was the last. So Jack and Neal would have one more encounter after that during that during that time, and so that was when your father kind of went from.
Oh.
He changed K's. He went from Kerouac to Kesey.
Well, I don't think it was right then, but you're right. Well, what happened was when let me think. When he got out of San Quentin, and Mom had planned a trip for all of us kids to go to Ireland to see her, you know, history. Well, she had the tickets, we were all packed, we're all excited. But when he got out of San Quentin, he wouldn't be released unless he had a home to go to. So Mom gave up all that and said, you know, okay, he can come home here, you know. So, so that went on for a bit, and then all of a sudden, she thought she should let him go to be Neal Cassady. He'd met King Kesey, he'd been, you know, all that kind of stuff. And Mom just really thought he'd be happier if he was not bound to the family. Well, that was the worst mistake she ever made. And she says that in her book. All Neal ever wanted was to be a family man, steady job, kids. So she let him loose, and that's when
Yeah,
he
that
was a
was-
prankster.
Yeah, he went to the pranksters. I don't know if you remember mentioned that he was involved with King Kesey and Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead, doing the acid test.
Yeah.
When your brother John was here, he told this story about how your father and Jerry Garcia came and pulled him out of school one day on the
Yeah.
pretext of
Oh,
taking
I
him to a
was there.
dental
They
appointment,
pulled me out,
and
too.
took him wherever to a Grateful Dead concert. Were you any part of that scene at all?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's my story. That's
Oh,
not
I'm sorry.
John's
Well, you can
story.
tell it then.
Okay, so I went to Saratoga High School, very upper scale, and one day they go, Jamie, get to the office, you know. So I went, and then my brother was there too, and we're like, what the heck, what'd we do? All of a sudden, there's Dad and Zonker, and, you know, I can't remember all the guys' names, and they told the principal we're going to the dentist. So they took us away. We got in this car in the back seat. You know, I was like 13 or something, and everybody was fun and happy and smoking. So what they did was they took us to a high school in Palo Alto, AWALT or something, and we sat up in the bleachers in the gym, and there was the Warlocks. They were practicing, or they were going to do a gig that night. Well, it was Jerry Garcia. It was, you know, the Grateful Dead. And
That was that.
That was cool.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's glad to. John was here about 10 years ago. I'm glad to get your version of that of the story now. I remember he was talking about that.
What'd he say?
Pretty much the same thing. He just somehow he left you out of it. You might want to talk to him about that.
I think you know, that's one thing. Kathy and John and I get together, and I go, "That's not what happened," and she goes, "No, it went this way." Yeah, it's funny how we don't know.
Well, you've already mentioned that in time your parents parted company, as you said. Your mother wanted to let Neal kind of go his way and be Neal, and
Right.
and we know very tragically that Neal passed away in February of 1968. We even lost Neal before we lost Jack. It was during a trip to Mexico, and I guess that had to be a kind of tough time. What, you're about 16, 17 years old, and you lose your father. Just
18.
To the extent you're comfortable about it, just you want to talk about that a little bit? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I remember John and Mom and I were sitting around our breakfast table. The phone rang. Mom went to get it. My sister was in Texas with her new husband, and it was JB, his girlfriend in Mexico. And she told Mom that he had died. And we all felt relief. We really did. I mean, it was suffering so bad. So then there's this whole story about how Mom tried to get JB to bring his ashes up. And she said she was so crazy that she had to maneuver or outsmart her or something to get her out of our house and keep the ashes. And she did. So
So you still have them there? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I got Moms, I got Dads.
Wow. Okay. Well, one more base we're going to touch here. We can't touch the occasion without saying a little bit about the Joan Anderson letters that came to light a couple years ago. Parts of it were already out there, and then the full manuscript was discovered. And for those who are not familiar with it, it's in brief. I think it's about a 4,000-word letter that Neal wrote to Jack in February of 1951, largely kind of depicting his exploits with a woman named Joan Anderson, and without getting into too much of the whole thing about who owns it. What I'm really interested in talking about here is that letter is credited with helping Jack find his literary voice. He'd been kind of trying to write like Thomas Wolfe up until then, and he gets this just outburst of 40,000 words, and I think that was when he thought, this is how I want to write. And so it was Neal who really helped him discover his own voice. And anything you want to riff on that? Sure.
Oh my gosh. You know, this letter has so much history and stories and everything. But Jack really, really, really changed his style of prose because of this one letter. And it's very important, I think. And it changed the literary landscape of, and Jack even told the Paris Review it was the greatest literature he'd ever read. And then after that, he started doing the spontaneous prose like Dad was. So I really think that's cool.
I do too, yeah. So really, no, when you read On the Road and you read the kind of pace of it, the way it moves, the way it flows, the energy that's in it, what you're really reading is what Jack got from your father when he, that's
the spontaneity.
That is terrific.
That run-on sentences with no
that's
punctuation.
The way, yeah.
And Jack adapted that. He loved it, and so then it was finally found 60 years later.
60 years later, they thought it had been tossed off of a houseboat somewhere, and it was actually laying around somewhere. Okay, I just want to see this, Jami. Your father Neal never made it to Lowell. Of all the places he and Jack spent together, and I'm sure Jack told him a lot about Lowell. They never quite made it here, but by golly, you brought Neal here with us tonight, and we want to thank you for that. That's really wonderful. Jami Cassady, all right.